I'm super excited to be here because it's true. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So she gave you a little bit of a sense of who I am. But I think the thing to really know, I run my own company called Radically Human, and what we do at Radically Human is we work with, I like to think of it as start users, the people who are designing products and services, and how do you actually go about working effectively together. So that's how I ended up from technology into essentially emotional and social intelligence is where I kind of focus most. So we're going to really talk today about the experience of change, the social experience of change, the emotional experience of change, the physical experience of change as well. Because anytime that you introduce change, people intellectually experience it, but they experience it as human beings, we experience it on all these other levels. And sometimes all those other levels is what is kind of coming up right at those hot moments. So when I think of change, I think of this as it's a big, broad word. We banter it around. It can be anything as small as moving desks, which, how many of you done that? Yeah, moving desks is actually an emotionally fraught experience, right? To organization change, to a shift in product strategy, to a change in an approach, to developing a process, to forming a new team. These are all change moments. And they all have sort of similar patterns to them that you can actually learn to work with. I have double mic. So there's two aspects to the experience of change that we're going to talk about today for you. One is to really help with your own resilience around change. Change happens all the time. So how do you personally experience it? So that you can actually then help your team navigate change as well. So you may be leading them, literally leading a team, or you may be part of a team that is experiencing some kind of a change. So that you have both sides of this, both personally, how you are resilient, and how you help people navigate change. So the first thing I want to do is actually tell you a story, because I love stories. Do you love stories? I love stories. Yeah, okay, good. Okay, so once upon a time, there was a farmer. And this farmer had beautiful horses. And one day while he was out in the fields, someone left the gate open, and all the horses escaped. And when he came home, he found that the horses were gone. And his neighbor came running over, said, "Oh my God, this is terrible. I can't believe you lost your horses. What are you going to do?" And the farmer says, "Who knows what's good and what's bad?" The neighbor's a little irritated, goes back to the neighboring farm. And the next day, while the farmer is out in the field, the horses come back and they bring with them this prize stallion. And so the farmer's like, and over comes the neighbor's like, "Oh my God, you're the luckiest guy in the world. Who knew that when your horses left, they would come back with this prize stallion?" And the farmer says, "Who knows what's good and what's bad?" And then the next day, his son, the farmer's son, is out breaking the new stallion in when the stallion kicks the son in the leg and breaks his leg. The neighbor, ever compassionate and worried about his farmer, comes running over and says, "Oh my God, this is tragic. Your son, broken leg, what are you going to do? He can't help you with this is horrible." And the farmer says, "Who knows what's good and what's bad?" And the following day, the province goes to war. And the army comes through conscripting all of the men to come and fight, all the young men of fighting age to fight in what will probably be a horrible, bloody thing. And they find the son with a broken leg, and they can't take him with them. And the neighbor comes over and says, "Oh my God, you're so lucky." And the farmer says, "Who knows what's good and what's bad?" And the neighbor says, "I realize he's a sage." I love this story because this concept of who knows what's good and what's bad, we never know what the outcome of an event is. A reorg can feel terrible but turn into a great thing. Someone leaving can feel a sense of loss, but it opens up opportunities for others. Likewise, someone new joining could also completely change the way the culture works. We never know what the outcome of events are. And for me, this particular story changed the way I deal with teams. Because now when I see anger, or now when I see even like exuberance over something, I always kind of say to myself, well, I don't really know where this is really going to go. And that's okay. So whatever's happening right now is okay. And this thing was going to play out. So that's the first thing. I really encourage you to kind of take that. Who knows what's good and what's bad? Because you really have a choice about how you experience change. You can let it brutalize you. right? Or you can write it, no matter how uncomfortable and just how uncomfortable it is. And change is almost always has some kind of discomfort. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So the reason I say this is that a lot of people that I work with, especially in large organizations, and most of my clients are in enterprise level organizations, this is what change feels like. At least this is how I interpret how change must feel like. Someone behind you is making shit happen, and you're just doing your best to not get hit in the head. Right? I just saw this and I was like, oh my God, that's like totally what it feels like. But this is the thing, and I love this, is that it's not that people resist change, it's they resist being changed. This isn't about people are somehow stubborn and that they're not going to do what you want them to do. It's much more about, is this a change I actually want to have happen? So there's change that happens to you and change. So the thing that I always like to remind myself is that how much opportunity there is in change. Some people see, like some change, like maybe a new product direction, that's kind of obvious. But sometimes things that feel, again, who knows what's good and what's bad, things that feel like they could be really negative, there's actually high potential in it. That's where creativity happens creativity happens in these moments of high constraints, or when high emotions, or when you just have to solve a problem in some kind of a new way. So there's a ton of opportunity in the face of change. But I kind of want to go a little bit deeper into the experience of it. Does anybody know what this is? Art history. This is the School of Athens by Raphael. And this guy right here in the front, I can't believe you guys don't know this. No, this is Heraclitus. Heraclitus, AKA the obscure, AKA Heraclitus, the weeping philosopher. This is the person who is attributed with the phrase as kind of the earliest known instance of the phrase, everything, the only thing constant is change. There's various translations of it, but that, like, everything is change is constant. This is the guy, he said it to Plato wrote it down in a book. The reason I bring this out is that change it's such a fundamental human experience. And it's not new to us. We may be experiencing accelerations in change, and things that are taxing sometimes our like primal brains, our we have things that are taxing us in new ways. But change itself is a constant part of human experience. In fact, it's the nature of human experience. It's my little Zen moment. Change just is. It just happens. And we all go through this. Look at the life and age of woman. From little girlhood all the way through, middle age, parenthood, and death. This is kind of the way that things work. And teams also have a similar life path as well. Organizations do too. There's an origin point, some kind of a conception. Teams come together. There's all of the events start to form its history. Even a team that's 3 months old has an interesting history to tell. There are moments of trouble. There's moments of awesomeness and triumph. All along the way, hopefully, there's a vision of a place that you're going towards, some compelling vision of the future. And then all along the way, you're setting objectives that help you understand whether you're getting closer to that vision or further away from that vision. But it's sort of like teams are I like to think of them as an organism in and of themselves. They have a life and a momentum and a path. And all through that history, there are these big moments of transition. And this is the area that I really want to focus on, because what happens in transition is really interesting. It's where all the good emotional stuff happens. So this is actually a model from relationship systems coaching, which is a model of how you think about teams as a system. Not as a collection of individuals, but what do we create as a system? And there's the essential notion. Some of this stuff seems really simple on some levels, but when we start playing with it, you'll see why it's a little complex. So the primary is what's here now. So what's here now is, at least for me, is I'm speaking to a room full of people. That's my primary. The secondary is what might happen next. So there's a million different secondaries that could happen. One really obvious one is that there's going to be a speaker after me. So for me, a secondary is that this talk will be done, and then I'm going to be maybe talking with some of you while there's another transition onto the stage, right? Another thing is you might actually be sitting here now, but you might be living in some other secondary. Like, I actually have to get on a call with a client after this. Does anyone have to get on a call with a client sometime this afternoon? that you've got like kind of piddling around in your head someplace like this? No? Wow, you guys they let you be here. Awesome. But what's interesting is in this transition place between primary and secondary. And that's actually where a lot of this sort of anxiety comes up and weird behavior starts to happen. Now, I gave you a really simple example, but I can be agonizing about when this talk is over. Is she going to come up and try to get her computer on top of mine while I'm still talking to people? Like there's some questions I have of unknowns about that, right? Even just such a simple example as that. And it starts to, make me think, like I can be kind of thinking about that and lose my sense of being here now, right? So there's a little bit of like split experience happening. But let me actually give you, I want to give you a really concrete example. One of the things about change is that it's super edgy, okay? Because it has all this discomfort and uncertainty about it. I want to ask you guys to do something. So what I would like you to do is look around the room, and I want you to find someone that you've never met before. And I'd like you to go over to them and tell them something of which you are completely ashamed of about yourself. I know. So nobody moved, which is interesting, right? Nobody ever moves when I do that, ever. But what I want you to know is the question is not important. What happened in the room? Like literally what happened in the room when I did that? Silence.
Nervous, tittering, and
tittering, laughing. Did anybody look around for like someone to be like, yeah?
Deer in headlights.
Yeah, deer. What was that?
Oh,
yeah.
I looked around for like who would be that.
Did anyone think like I need to go to the bathroom or I need to check my email? Like those little impulses of like I need to not be here now. Those, okay, so that I do that because I want you to experience, those are edge behaviors. For just something, if I asked you to do something that's ridiculous, I asked you to do something that's vulnerable, it has no attachment to really anything. So it's out of the blue, and it's sudden, and it's risky. So that kind of thing causes edge behaviors to come up. So edge behaviors are things like the giggling, posture changes, changing the subject. Sometimes when I do this, people start asking, they'll be like, well, actually, can you tell me about this other thing? I'm like, wait a minute, I just asked you to do something. Why are we going to talk about this other thing? So changing the subject, asking lots of questions also, clarifying. Can you clarify what do you mean by ashamed? Like, you know what you mean. You know what I mean by ashamed, right? So I'll get that too. Fidgeting, nervousness. Here's something interesting is you get a sense of loss of energy in the room. So the room kind of got like a little bit like, and then there's a little change in energy. People seem to feel confused, but you often will feel confused too. So when I'm speaking, so this kind of thing, when you're making a proposal in a group of people, sometimes these are the edge behaviors that show up. You're giving a presentation and you're like, what just happened? Everyone is like, right? So the reason I bring these up is because this is totally normal. This is the way human beings react. Even if the change is potentially a positive thing, there's often like a little bit of a, hey, hang on, I like where I am right now. Why am I going to go into there? And there's some good biological reasons for that. It's good to kind of know where you're not going to be eaten. It's good to know that you're, safe as well. So there's reasons that kind of stuff comes up. Now here's the deal, is when you actually ask someone to make a change really quickly without any reasoning, that is huge. People can often go into a state of realm, which is kind of this dark, sticky, try not to swear as much, shitty, stuck place. Have you ever been in a room with someone who's suddenly like, this company is always terrible, it will always be terrible, same shit over and over and over again, nothing is ever gonna get better, and I might as well just, I don't know, I'm just gonna go play a game, fuck it, right? That could be realm. Sometimes it's when someone's been asked to do something repeatedly, it's a place of exhaustion too. So no information comes in, no information goes out. You can't solve a problem when someone is in that state. They're just in that state. So the only thing that you can really do is take a break, let that person process. Because here's the really cool thing about emotions, is that emotions are like weather patterns. They blow in and then they blow out. People can't stay in a heightened state of anger forever. You physically can't stay there. I mean, you all know people who are really good at conjuring it back up, right? But it's not a permanent state. Joy is not a permanent state either. There's always like an ebb and a flow to these things. So when people are experiencing something really intense, one of the best things you can do is to wait it out. So I love, this quote is sort of the cornerstone of my practice. I only found it last week, but I was like, this is actually the way I think about things. So action without reflection leads to burnout. But reflection without action leads to cynicism. So when you do this kind of work, we talk about the experience of change. It's like, okay, this is nice. I'm reflecting on it. Okay, I got something out of it. What do I actually do about this, right? Now, I think it's really important in our doing culture that we do actually pause and reflect from time to time, because it shows us, we get so kind of in our path forward this way that, well, we get burned out. So being able to reflect shows us a different way to do things. But there's also, I want to just talk about like some real costs to being in action without reflection all the time. When you have a team that is not functioning well, there's often a really high turnover. We talk about people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And I actually say in this day and age, it's really like people don't leave managers, they leave teams. You're with a group of people, we're just not getting whatever it is we need to do done together. We're in endless meetings, whatever the issues are around the troubleness. And there's a real cost to organizations about this. So this is like, I think this is actually a pretty conservative estimate, that when you lose somebody, you're talking about 35% of their salary for the year, right? And you add that up, that includes like the loss of time, knowledge, all the recruiting costs, all of that. There's an enormous amount of cost to losing people. So it's important to spend time talking about the impact of change and how you want it to be. So the other aspect, and this is something that I just really kind of makes me sad, is there's this, I would call like a disengagement epidemic. This is from a Gallup poll in 2001. 71% of Americans, workers, are not engaged or actively disengaged with their work. So when you talk about wanting to innovate or change processes or be creative, if you're dealing with this kind of disengagement and a feeling of exhaustion, how can you possibly make change, right? So this is why I think it's important to have these conversations of like, what is it really like? And how can we apply this? There was a question in the last session about how you actually start. I don't know if I can quite phrase it right, but it was basically something along the lines of like, how do you actually get people, it's basically how do you get people engaged with change, is how I heard it. Maybe I just hear everything that way.
No, that was good.
Is that right? Is that you?
That's a good summary for
Okay, sweet. Because I was like, ooh, I got an answer for that question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how you help teams over the edge. And what I'm going to try to do is give you some really practical steps for doing this, okay? So there's a whole bunch of things you can do. So the first one is to ask them to try something out, even for a short period of time. So you might say something like, let's pilot this new XYZ process, technique, whatever, for 1 month, see how it goes, and revisit it on such and such a date. Which sounds a lot like an experiment, right? You can do that with people processes too. It's an experiment. It's one of the reasons I love the lean process so much, because it's like you're making things into chunks that feel manageable that you can try, rather than trying to like eat the whole elephant at once, right? Another thing that you can do is to, as a leader, you actually need to model going over the edge, right? So if you're not willing to go first, why would someone follow you? So I'll say something like, I've already tried this thing. I've already been using this tool, and here's what I've learned about it. Or I've already done something like this, and here's my experience with it. So it's the way that you personally demonstrate that you're willing to not just talk about it, but to do something about it. The third thing is acknowledging discomfort, which is it's important to normalize the emotional response to change. And I'm not talking about having big, how do we feel, trust fall kinds of meetings. I'm just talking about something really small, which is to say, increasing the team size makes me feel uncomfortable too. But I think this is why it's important, right? So acknowledging a little bit of humanity in it without going too far into your own personal issues. She has learned from her work. So ask the team to participate in change. So this is one of the most powerful parts. I'm going to show you this framework, which is a ground conditions for change, and it comes from Margaret Wheatley's work. And she does a lot of work with big systems change on a social level, economic change, various kinds of work around race relations, things like that. And so this framework is what she uses, and I use it all the time actually as a checklist for my clients when they're thinking about proposing a new change to their team or whatever. It's like, here's the things I want to make sure that you do. So the first one is to make sure everyone has the same information. Seems like a really easy thing to say, but how many times have you gotten, someone says, we're going to go do this, and you have no context? Does that ring a bell? Yeah, no? Little bit. So sometimes that happens. Now, the thing to remember as someone, if you're proposing change, is that I do a lot of movement stuff, so I have time. In the time moving up to the time where you have decided this is the right way to go, or you and your team have decided this is the right way to go, you've done research, you've had conversations, you have a whole kind of logic, or at least feeling about why this change should happen. And when you present something to someone without any of that, I mean, a lot of times leaders forget that part. They're like, here's the conclusion we arrived at, here's how it's going to work, and people are like, well, wait a minute, what? Why? It's just remembering that the amount of time you took to get to that stage, people need a little bit of time as well. So it's both getting new information and then allowing people time to process it. So the very practical way to think about this is don't just do a presentation, think of a rollout program. So I present the information, give them time to process, we come back, we talk about it, right? A lot of leaders will just we're just gonna have a big all hands meeting, and that's the last you hear of it. Tying it to a sense of purpose. So Mary said this very kind of quickly in one of the slides, start with the why. Meaning and having something that you actually believe in, that people believe in, that's the core of a lot of the work we do together. When I run into a team that is wildly misaligned or fighting a lot or has a lot of sort of toxic issues, a lot of times it comes back to a lack of shared purpose. That they don't all agree on why they're there in the first place. So one of the things that you need to do when you're proposing a change is, how does this really relate to why we're here in the first place? Give it meaning. It's not just a doing, and give it meaning. I love this one. Everyone understands when or if they will have input. So not every decision is a collective decision. Doesn't have to be. And it may not be the right, sometimes Mary also, I'm just thinking Mary set up some of these things really well. In life-threatening situations, you can't have a democratic process when there's something life-threatening happening. There's things have to happen, decisions have to be made, right? That's not the way a lot of us work. Obviously, we're not working in something that's life-threatening, honestly, though it feels that way sometimes. But what's important is that people understand when or if they're going to have input. So you make a change, and then you make a proposal, and then you say, so I'd like to hear from you. Or we don't have time to take input right now, but at some point we will, right? The point is not whether or not you take input. The point is that you're really clear about it. Because people will hear no. People will be okay with no if you address it, right? I actually don't have time for input right now. Maybe at another point, but not right now. People are more willing to accept that than for you to just present something and walk out the door. So it's more like addressing the issue. And then this is my favorite one, is everyone needs to understand what will happen with the input. Because how many meetings do you go to where you give input and it goes into a black hole and you never see it again? So this is actually about being honest and having a plan about what you're going to do with the input and being able to communicate it back. Thank you for giving all of this to us, to our group, or thank you for giving. What we're going to do is we're going to process it, we're going to think about it. You may or may not see it again in exactly the same form, but rest assured we're looking at it, right? This is about communicating that, not just saying thank you for giving, see you later. So these ground conditions can really ease that transition. And it's not just lip service. This isn't just like about manipulating people into going to have change. This is actually about really engaging people in the process. Allowing time for process and discussion. Shock. Even 20 minutes sometimes, like set a timer, like vent about something for 20 minutes. And the last one that I love is expect and plan for dissatisfaction. Somewhere between, wait a minute, I don't know where this statistic comes from, I really don't. But 1 to 19% of people will disagree with whatever your proposal is. And this isn't a bad thing. This is in that realm of who knows what's good and what's bad. Dissatisfaction or disagreement is not a bad thing. You don't have to have 100% buy-in. What's really interesting is to think about, go from the assumption that some percentage isn't going to like what you're proposing. And then you can have a plan for dealing with that. Because often, there may be somebody for whom they may realize this just isn't for them. They're not going to ever buy into it, and now they're clear about that, and they will kind of drift away. And that's a good thing. I mean, well, who knows what's good and bad, but it's generally a good thing. You want people on your team who want to be there, right? But the second group of people are the people who are holding the team to a higher standard. That they're the ones who are seeing, they're like, you know, this just isn't enough, right? There's always the like, this isn't enough. Those are the people you can engage in the next round of revision, or whatever the next round of change is, because they have something interesting to say about it. So they're dissatisfied with this because it's not enough. The other kind of group around that is the people who are dissatisfied and have a really good point about that. So you learn to listen to what's the 2% truth of what that group is saying. What's a little bit true that can go into the next thing. So having a plan as well at the end when you're doing the change of like, how am I going to actually work with these people when that happens, makes the whole process so much easier. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.